live pictures coming in as the final arrivals marked by the arrival of his son, the ex-president, of course, George W. Bush, who will be delivering one of the eulogies at this service. Other presidents, including President Donald Trump, his predecessors Barack Obama, Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, also scheduled to attend the service. This is the scene at the Capitol. We can bring in our US correspondent Gary O'Donoghue. And Gary, this is a state event, and a number of world leaders, as we were saying, arriving from all over the world.
Yeah, it is. It's the full pomp of the American state on display here today, as you would expect for a former president. 5 living presidents will be attending, and a number of people from around the world, heads of state. Angela Merkel is coming from Germany. Prince Charles will be there representing the Queen. Others, like the King of Jordan, will also be there. And they will listen to, as you said, the former President George W. Bush deliver the main eulogy. And he'll be speaking, of course, not just as a former president, but as also son of the 41st president. And that would be, I think, a very poignant moment for the nation, where he tries to, in a sense, balance those two duties as both former president and son in that extraordinary moment that we'll see in the next hour or so. You'll see on display, as you can hear, the various branches of the US military playing those well rehearsed and familiar tunes that they do on these occasions. There'll be a number of readings also from Bush family members during the service, and at the end, after it's all done and dusted, they will transport the coffin from the Washington National Cathedral back to Joint Base Andrews outside of the city, to be flown back to Texas for a funeral tomorrow and an interment at the Presidential Library in College Station in Texas.
The current president, Donald Trump, has tweeted in the last half hour. He said, looking forward to being with the Bush family. This is not a funeral. This is a day of celebration for a great man who's led a long and distinguished life. He will be missed. From a man these two didn't necessarily see eye to eye.
No, indeed. I mean, we know from a biography, that's probably the most authoritative biography of Bush Sr., that he didn't vote for Donald Trump in the election. He voted for Hillary Clinton, we're told by his biographer. There was a lot of animosity between the Trump family and the Bushes. We know that indeed, and on the campaign trail, Donald Trump really took issue with, made fun in many ways of George Bush Sr., particularly of his sort of 1,000 points of light speech that the former president had made back during his campaigning days. So, and they represent, of course, two very, very different branches of the Republican Party. Donald Trump very much a sort of an insurgent, a man who's taken over the Republican Party, turned it in many ways into his own image. George Bush Sr., of course, representing a much more old-style, patrician, more conciliatory, more bipartisan form of republicanism that held sway really until, I guess, until the late 80s and the early 90s. Things had already begun to change under him. Ronald Reagan had seen to that, and even an earlier generation, people like Barry Goldwater had tried to do something similar with moving the Republican Party right. But really towards the end of George Bush Sr., there was a definite shift to the right, evangelical influence, and then of course when Bill Clinton became president, the ascendancy of people like Newt Gingrich, and a real push to the right by the Republican Party. George Bush Sr. Wouldn't sit easily in the Republican Party of today, certainly.
Gary, let's just join the ceremony because the body is being moved. Let's just listen in for a moment. And Gary, as the coffin is loaded onto the hearse, we've been seeing regularly pictures of his son, George Bush Jr., and his wife, Laura, and it's easy to forget that on a state occasion like this is also a family event.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is an intensely, in many ways, an intensely public family. It's a dynasty, a political dynasty, but also this is them living out and going through the motions of a very private event under the glare of the nation's spotlight and the nation's cameras. So it must be a very difficult moment for them too, because they will want to be having their own private thoughts, going through their own grief, and they know at the same time that this is a moment and a ceremony that the nation feels it owns as well and wants to participate in. So I think that's why in many ways the formality helps with this. The ritual of these things gives people a certain predictability, a certain process by which they can sort of plot and track their mourning and their grief. And then they will get their moment, their real private moment tomorrow in Texas at a private ceremony and the private burial. And that will be something obviously that they will cherish very much. But very much today, this is in many ways the nation's moment to mark the passing of their 41st president, to remember his achievements, to also, of course, think about some of the things he was criticised for, and in some ways one of the rarities in the modern era, a president who didn't make a second term in office, but also someone who presided over some very key moments in the nation's history. You think about the end of the Cold War. He was president when the Berlin Wall came down. He oversaw that process and encouraged that process of then German reunification, and of course the end of the Gulf War, the Gulf War in that process, and the end of the Cold War in general through his presidency. So some really momentous periods in 20th century history were there and in front of
Gary,
him under his stewardship.
Thank you very much, Gary. And what we'll do now is we'll join my colleague Catty Kay for special coverage, continuing coverage of the funeral of the former US President George H.W. Bush.